Forget the cinematic knights in shining armor and brilliant tacticians. We're ripping the romanticized band-aid off to reveal a historical blooper reel that elite schools refuse to teach. You'll watch a pope sue a rotting corpse, a Viking drop dead from poor dental hygiene, and a monarch burst into a raging fireball. Prepare to lose all respect for our human ancestry. 1. The heir to the English throne doomed his own country because he threw a raucous boat party. Prince William Adelin escaped a catastrophic ship crash in the dead of night. He sat safely in a wooden lifeboat, yards from the jagged rocks, but decided to paddle right back into a churning mob of drowning aristocrats. Hundreds of desperate hands clawed at his tiny vessel in the freezing dark, dragging him and the only royal succession plan straight to the bottom of the icy ocean. He played the role of a billionaire frat boy mixing drunk sailing with a tragic superhero complex. He handed his kingdom a 20-year national severance package written in saltwater and endless civil war. His father paced the shore waiting for a son who prioritized wine over basic survival instincts. What's your worst party mistake? 2. A new pontiff threw such vicious temper tantrums that his exhausted staff rage quit and hired a second boss. Pope Urban VI threatened his executives, hurling insults and screaming in their faces during routine morning meetings until they feared for their lives. The terrified cardinals packed their bags, fled the city of Rome, and split the Catholic Church right down the middle just to escape his relentless verbal abuse. He slammed his fists on tables and morphed into the ultimate toxic chief executive officer, creating a 40-year religious schism because he lacked elementary anger management skills. Millions of devout peasants chose sides in a brutal holy war, triggered by a man who couldn't handle a simple mood swing without threatening damnation. You don't need an army to fracture a continent. HR would fire him. 3. Two legendary Vikings pulled off a genius Trojan horse fake death stunt to conquer Rome, only to realize they raided the wrong zip code. Bjorn Ironside and Hastein marched up to massive stone walls, crying over a supposedly dead chieftain to gain entry for a peaceful Christian burial. Once inside the chapel, the dead man kicked open his wooden coffin, grabbed a hidden broadsword, and slaughtered the city guards alongside his men. They stood victorious over the bleeding streets, admiring their tactical deception, until a terrified local pointed out they had just massacred the sleepy town of Luna. They didn't rely on swords, shields, or a premium subscription to a modern navigation app. They orchestrated a legendary heist but held up a local diner because their geographical radar lagged. Epic tactical failure. A famous monarch leaned against a faulty iron window grill and plunged to his violent death, cementing Fact 4. Henry II of Jerusalem survived years of grueling holy wars and brutal assassination attempts, only to be taken out by terrible carpentry. He tripped backward out of a high tower window. His loyal dwarf servant lunged forward to grab his royal tunic and pull him back to safety, but physics had other plans. The servant lost his footing on the slick floorboards, tumbled out of the exact same window, and landed right on top of the king, delivering the fatal crushing blow on the cobblestones below. He survived a merciless desert war zone only to get eliminated by a lack of building codes and a lethal slapstick comedy routine. You can't dodge gravity. Did your house ever try to kill you? 5. A Persian ruler ignored a peace treaty from Genghis Khan and chose to shave the diplomats' beards instead. Shah Muhammad II stared at a massive trade deal presented by peaceful envoys. He decided to flex his fragile ego, arresting the merchants, burning their precious goods, and mailing severed heads right back to the deadliest warlord walking the earth. Genghis Khan responded by mobilizing a tidal wave of mounted archers that swept across the desert and reduced the Khwarezmian Empire to blood-soaked ash. The Shah hit the reply all button with a massive middle finger, directed at the chief executive of a hostile takeover firm. His massive armies, sprawling cities, and grand legacy were deleted from the historical server in a matter of months. He died shivering alone on a muddy island. Egos ruin empires. 6. A brilliant pontiff ignored construction warnings to build a private reading room, which collapsed on his head. Pope John the 21st wanted to escape the daily noise of church politics. He ordered laborers to construct a quiet chamber attached to his stone palace, brushing off their urgent warnings about the unstable foundation. He moved his heavy books inside, fell asleep in his new sanctuary, and got crushed by a falling roof when the structural integrity gave way in the middle of the night. He was the smartest guy in the medieval room, who forgot that a university degree doesn't protect your skull from terrible drywall installation and basic gravity. He traded annoying meetings for a sudden burial under tons of jagged masonry and splintered timber. Academic brilliance is useless when the ceiling caves in. Physics always wins. 7. A Scottish king rode his horse off a cliff in a pitch-black storm just because he couldn't wait until morning to see his young wife. Alexander III stood at a safe castle gate, while his loyal advisors begged him on their knees not to travel through a roaring hurricane. He ignored their desperate pleas, spurred his horse into the freezing rain, lost his way on the treacherous coastal path, and tumbled down a jagged rocky drop into the unforgiving sea below. He died in the mud, leaving his realm with no clear heir. It was the most destructive late-night booty call in human history. His raw impatience plunged a stable nation into a bloody succession crisis and centuries of brutal civil war against the English. He traded his powerful kingdom for a wet ride in the dark. Would you risk death for a midnight date? 8. A powerful king survived lethal plagues, poisonings, and massive wars, only to die by walking right into a doorframe on his way to watch a tennis match. Charles VIII of France was rushing through a dimly lit castle hallway to catch the sporting event. He forgot to duck his royal head, slammed his skull against a low stone lintel, fell backward into the dirt, and gave himself a fatal concussion. He stumbled up and managed to watch the match, but collapsed into a deep coma and died mere hours later. The ultimate failure of spatial awareness played out in front of his panicked court. He bypassed assassins, heavy cavalry charges, and elaborate political traps, only to be taken out by a stationary piece of interior architecture. A formidable military defense system failed against a simple wooden beam. Look where you walk. Picture a holy man gripping a giant baseball bat on a battlefield. 9. A wealthy bishop bypassed the strict Christian ban on shedding blood by using a massive wooden club to crush enemy skulls instead of cutting them. Bishop Odo of Bayeux rode into the brutal Battle of Hastings wearing heavy chainmail over his religious robes. He believed God wouldn't mind horrific blunt force trauma as long as there were no open stab wounds to break the technical rules. He swung a heavy iron mace from horseback, shattering collarbones and caving in helmets with gleeful, righteous fury while his enemies screamed. He operated like a ruthless modern corporate lawyer, finding the ultimate technical loophole in the heavenly HR handbook to commit mass violence guilt-free. He beat men to a bloody pulp and called it spiritual obedience. Semantics kill people. 10. A paralyzed king was prescribed a full-body alcohol wrap and was burned alive by his own servant. Charles II of Navarre lay shivering in his bed when doctors ordered him to be sewn tightly into thick sheets soaked in pure brandy. His loyal attendant finished stitching the volatile fabric around his neck. She needed to sever a loose thread, but instead of finding a pair of scissors, she grabbed a live candle to burn the string away. The open flame kissed the fabric and ignited the alcohol vapor, turning the helpless monarch into a screaming human torch trapped in a flammable burrito. It was an extreme spa day gone wrong, proving that marinating a sick man in liquor is a terrible medical strategy. He burned to a crisp in his own bedroom while his staff watched in horror. Ever tried a dangerous medical trend? 11. A paranoid pontiff declared a holy war on black cats, resulting in a horrific rat infestation that fueled the Black Death. I'm not making this up. Pope Gregory IX convinced all of Europe that felines were literal instruments of Satan. Terrified villagers grabbed pitchforks and caused a mass slaughter of cats across the continent. This paranoid crusade removed the only biological defense mechanism standing between humanity and millions of plague-carrying fleas. The rat population exploded, running freely through dirty city streets and spreading a disease that wiped out a third of the civilized world. It was a catastrophic ecological self-own. He deleted the medieval antivirus software because he thought the firewall looked demonic. He tried to fight the devil and ended up handing him the keys to the continent. Ignorance breeds disaster. 12. An incompetent ruler of 3 entire nations got fired from all his thrones and decided to become a bloodthirsty pirate. King Eric of Pomerania spent years frustrating his nobles with terrible economic policies until they united to kick him out of Scandinavia. Instead of retiring quietly to a countryside estate, he took his royal severance package, moved to a jagged rocky island, and spent a decade terrorizing the Baltic Sea. He commanded rogue fleets to raid and sink the exact same merchant ships he used to tax. He pulled the ultimate toxic career pivot, transforming from a polished regional monarch into an aggressive maritime cartel boss just because he hated the concept of quitting. He swapped a golden crown for a rusty cutlass and robbed his former subjects blind. He died a wealthy outlaw, resignation rejected. His fragile brain shut down into a deep coma the exact moment he heard his wife gave birth, kicking off Fact 13. King Henry VI of England received the joyful news of his newborn heir. Instead of celebrating, his exhausted mind snapped under the pressure, plunging him into a catatonic state for 18 agonizing months. While his crumbling country was losing a massive war in France, he sat motionless in his royal chair, drooling and staring blankly at the stone wall. He woke up a year and a half later only to discover his unannounced nap had triggered the bloody wars of the Roses. His biological operating system crashed during a critical software update, taking the entire national mainframe offline while he rested in sleep mode. He checked out of reality and let his kingdom burn to the ground. Stress kills nations. 14. An arrogant Templar grandmaster bullied his army into a brutal desert march with no water, handing total victory to the enemy. Gerard de Riedfort called his experienced peers cowardly women for wanting to camp near a vital flowing spring. He force-marched thousands of heavily armored troops through a scorching July desert, demanding they push forward under the relentless blinding sun. He watched his elite soldiers collapse from severe dehydration in the sand before a single sword swung in battle. Saladin's forces surrounded the exhausted, parched survivors and slaughtered them with terrifying ease. He played the role of a toxic gym bro, screaming about gains while actively leading his entire squad into a fatal collective heatstroke. He doomed the Crusader states because his fragile ego couldn't handle a logical detour. Ever let your ego destroy your team? 15. A blind emperor regained his stolen throne, only to rehire the exact same traitors who originally blinded and ruined him. Isaac II Angelus clawed his way back to supreme power after years of miserable exile in a dungeon. He ignored a mountain of glaring red flags and surrounded himself with the wealthy aristocrats who mocked his disability. He handed out crucial military commands to the men who previously held the hot irons to his eyes. They inevitably betrayed him a second time, overthrew his crumbling government, and invited hostile crusaders to sack the glittering city of Constantinople. He orchestrated the political equivalent of getting back together with a toxic ex who already stole your car and set your house on fire. He literally handed the burning match right back to the confident arsonist, blind in every way. 16. An aging king ate himself to death by consuming a massive bucket of horrifying blood-sucking fish against doctor's orders. King Henry I of England returned from a hunting trip and demanded a feast of slimy river lampreys. His royal physicians begged him to eat something else, warning that the parasitic creatures would ruin his frail digestion. He refused to practice basic portion control, devouring a mountain of the rubbery monsters until his stomach violently rebelled. His digestive system exploded in a fit of agonizing spasms, killing him painfully over the next week. It ranks as the ultimate failure of self-control. He died of VIP food poisoning because he couldn't say no to a midnight snack of ugly aquatic vampires. He traded his heavy gold crown for a stomach ache that ended his life. Gluttony has a price. 17. A narcissistic monarch stole a dangerous man's inheritance, then left the country undefended. King Richard II confiscated vast estates from an exiled, highly popular general named Henry Bolingbroke. Instead of preparing for the inevitable violent backlash, Richard packed his bags and took his army on a casual military vacation to the bogs of Ireland. He left the English throne sitting empty. The furious general sailed back across the Channel, marched into London with cheering crowds, and took the crown without breaking a sweat. Richard basically robbed a ruthless mafia boss and then left his front door wide open while he went on a relaxing, carefree weekend getaway to another island. He returned from his trip to find his job, his wealth, and his freedom revoked by the guy he scammed. Arrogance meets reality. 18. A charismatic priest convinced 40,000 unarmed peasants to walk across the world to a brutal war zone without food, weapons, or training. Peter the Hermit whipped desperate farmers into a religious frenzy, promising them divine protection against seasoned soldiers. He led this starving mob across Europe, eventually abandoning them outside hostile territory to go beg for actual supplies. Left alone, the untrained civilians wandered blindly into an ambush and were massacred by professional Turkish archers in mere minutes. It stands as history's worst motivational seminar. He hyped up a naive crowd of interns to fight a hardened team of military operators armed only with farming tools and good vibes. He marched innocent people into a meat grinder and slipped away in the dark. Can enthusiasm replace actual hard skills? 19. The head of state of Venice tried to stage a bloody coup against his own government over a minor personal insult. Doge Marino Faliero heard a nasty rumor that a young nobleman wrote an offensive poem about his wife. Enraged by the petty gossip, the top ruler plotted to assassinate his own ruling council and install himself as an untouchable dictator. His sloppy conspiracy got exposed by a guilt-ridden accomplice. The armed guards dragged the 70-year-old leader out of his palace and chopped his head off for committing treason against his own regime. He acted like a paranoid chief executive officer who tried to secretly burn down his corporate headquarters just because a junior employee left a mean sticky note on his desk. He threw away a lifetime of prestige over a bad joke. Ego destroys legacy. 20. The most powerful man in France spent his reign terrified that his body was made of fragile glass and would shatter. King Charles VI suffered a severe mental break, convincing himself he wasn't human anymore. He refused to let anyone touch his skin, sprinted away from his own children, and wrapped himself in thick woolen blankets during the summer heat. He even demanded his tailors sew iron rods directly into his royal clothes to prevent his imaginary glass torso from breaking into a million pieces during a stiff breeze. It showcases the ultimate paradox of absolute power. He had undisputed control over a massive nation, but put himself in permanent bubble wrap out of pure psychological fragility. He commanded thousands of armed knights while terrified of bumping into a wooden table. The mind breaks before the body. 21. A blind king demanded to fight in a chaotic battle, tied his horse to his guards, and died in the muddy carnage. King John of Bohemia heard the violent clash of swords at the Battle of Crécy and refused to sit safely on the sidelines. To ensure he didn't ride off a cliff or hit a tree, he ordered his knights to knot their horses' bridles tightly to his own. The tangled group charged blindly forward into a furious storm of English arrows, resulting in the entire royal squad getting slaughtered and dying in a heaped pile of twisted armor and horseflesh. It represents the absolute peak of toxic bravery. He essentially joined a hardcore professional gaming tournament while his computer monitor was turned off. He dragged his best friends into a suicidal meat grinder just to prove a pointless point about honor. Courage requires eyesight. 22. The wealthiest lord in England lost a major rebellion because he walked his massive army across a narrow wooden bridge. Thomas of Lancaster marched his powerful rebel forces toward a decisive battle at Boroughbridge. He boldly ordered his heavily armored knights to push across a timber bridge spanning a rushing river. He didn't bother checking underneath the structure, where clever royalist pikemen were hiding in the muddy shadows. The hidden enemy thrust long steel spears right up through the wide gaps in the floorboards, skewering his elite cavalry from below in a horrific trap. He operated like a cocky billionaire with premium hardware dismantled by a group of guys who just exploited a glaring glitch in the map geometry. He lost his head because he forgot to look down at his feet. Do you ever forget to check the basics? 23. A hated English chancellor tried to flee the country dressed as a female peddler, but got exposed by a flirty local fisherman. William Longchamp desperately needed to escape a mob of angry barons. He disguised himself in a long green gown, put a thick veil over his face, and sat on a beach waiting for a boat. A local sailor walked by, saw the figure, and decided to lean in for a romantic kiss. The sailor pulled back the veil, panicked upon seeing a tall, bearded man who spoke zero English, and started screaming for the authorities. The mob dragged the humiliated politician to a dark dungeon. It ranks as the worst political drag performance in history. He proved that terrible disguise mechanics will ruin a high-stakes stealth mission before it even begins. He failed a survival run because of a bad outfit. Keep your veil down. 24. The last king of a legendary 300-year-old dynasty did 0 tasks for a year and then died by tripping in the woods. King Louis V of France inherited a sprawling historical legacy. He spent his short reign passing no significant laws, winning no battles, and having no children. He went hunting one afternoon, lost his footing, fell hard off his horse, and died from a fever a few days later, erasing centuries of royal Carolingian history. He lived as the human equivalent of a broken web error page. He loaded into the intricate medieval simulation, performed no discernible actions, and crashed the entire server upon exiting. He literally wiped out Charlemagne's majestic bloodline because he couldn't maintain his balance on a dirt path. A quiet life ends in silence. Stupidity erased history. 25. An arrogant commander ignored veteran advice, charged alone into narrow city streets, and got his massive army slaughtered. Count Robert of Artois wanted to prove his supreme manhood at the Battle of Courtrai. He loudly called his experienced allies cowardly women for suggesting a cautious tactical approach. He spurred his horse forward, leading a reckless cavalry charge into an obvious urban trap filled with muddy ditches. Trapped in the cramped alleys, local militia rained heavy rocks, sharpened sticks, and boiling water down onto his trapped knights until the mud turned red. He acted like that one annoying online teammate who screams a battle cry and rushes the enemy base while the rest of the squad begs him to wait. His loud ego fed his friends to an urban meat grinder. Have you ever worked with arrogant teammates? 26. A manipulative duke invited a massive foreign army into his country to fight his rivals, only to get conquered by them instead. Ludovico Sforza thought he hatched a brilliant scheme to secure power in Milan. He politely asked the powerful French military to march down and act as his cheap personal bodyguards. The French arrived, took one look at his incredibly rich, undefended city, and decided to just steal his job. They kicked him off the throne, looted his wealth, and threw the mastermind into a miserable underground dungeon. He played a complex game of geopolitical chess, but forgot that inviting a hungry pack of wolves into a wooden henhouse makes you the primary menu item. He handed the keys of his vault to a seasoned burglar and expected a thank you note. He outsmarted himself right into a tiny jail cell. Checkmate failed. 27. An 18-year-old pontiff treated the Vatican like a personal brothel and was murdered by an angry husband who caught him cheating. Think about that for a second. Pope John XII spent his reign gambling stolen church funds, toasting to the devil during drunken night parties, and turning sacred marble halls into a loud venue for his affairs. His reign of terror ended when a furious man walked into a dark bedroom, caught the head of the church in bed with his wife, and smashed his skull with a heavy hammer. He turned a sacred global institution into a trashy reality television show, ending his chaotic season finale with a fatal dose of domestic violence. He thought wearing a holy crown made him invincible to a blunt metal object swung by a betrayed spouse. He died in sin wearing holy robes. Karma swings a heavy hammer. 28. A king took massive bribe money to start a war with France, but used it to fight his own neighbors instead and got fired. King Adolf of Nassau was elected specifically because the ruling nobles thought he was a weak pushover. He aggressively scammed the King of England out of a fortune, promising to launch a fierce military campaign. Instead of fighting the French, he took the cash to buy more land for his own personal lawn. The furious nobility immediately deposed him. He fought back and was assassinated in his very first battle. He basically took premium venture capital funding for an innovative tech startup and spent it all on personal jet skis until the angry board of directors stabbed him to death on a muddy field. He treated a geopolitical alliance like an unregulated slush fund and paid for the fraud with his life. Embezzlement is fatal. 29. A reckless crusader continually robbed peaceful desert caravans until he made Saladin so angry he was personally decapitated. Renaud of Chatillon acted like a violent rogue highwayman, broke countless sacred truces, and murdered unarmed merchants. Even after his army was crushed and he was dragged into an enemy tent as a bound captive, he trolled the most powerful Muslim leader by grabbing a cup of ice water and drinking it without permission. Saladin drew a heavy sword and severed his head on the spot. He played the role of an annoying internet troll who kept leaving unhinged, inflammatory comments until the server admin physically tracked down his location and deleted him in real life. He refused to read the room, even when the royal tent was filled with hostile men holding sharp blades. Did your arrogance ever cost you dearly? 30. An 11th century monk built wooden wings, jumped off a tall stone abbey, broke both his legs, and blamed the crash on not having a tail. Aylmer of Malmesbury strapped a set of heavy homemade wings to his arms and hurled himself boldly into the freezing wind. He caught a strong breeze and glided for a brief, terrifying moment, but crashed into the dirt because he couldn't steer his body. Lying in the mud with shattered bones, he insisted that his mathematical physics were fine and he simply forgot to install a vital butt rudder. He operated like an early tech bro, launching a rushed beta product with zero safety testing, convinced that a future software patch would magically fix a pulverized femur. He trusted his fragile human life to a pile of sticks and some glued feathers. Gravity demands respect. 31. The mighty leader of the Third Crusade ruined an entire global holy war because he didn't want to wait in medieval traffic. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa rode his warhorse up to a narrow, crowded bridge spanning a rushing river in modern-day Turkey. Annoyed by the slow-moving line of tired soldiers, the old monarch tried to swim across the fast currents while wearing a full suit of heavy steel plate armor. He sank straight to the bottom like an anvil and drowned instantly, causing his massive leaderless army to panic, pack up their tents, and just walk home. He bypassed the basic terms of service on human buoyancy, choosing a fatal watery shortcut rather than waiting 5 extra minutes on a sturdy wooden bridge. He single-handedly bankrupted a massive military campaign out of pure impatience. Have you ever taken a terrible shortcut? 32. A vindictive pontiff hated his dead predecessor so much he dug up his rotting corpse and put it on trial for treason. Pope Stephen VI hated Pope Formosus with a burning passion. He ordered his guards to exhume the decaying skeleton, dressed it in lavish papal robes, and propped it up on a wooden throne inside the Holy Basilica. Stephen paced the floor, spending hours screaming angry legal questions at a silent, decomposing body while terrified deacons stood by. He found the corpse guilty, hacked off its blessing fingers with a sharp knife, and threw the remains into the roaring Tiber River. It was the display of posthumous toxic energy. He basically stalked his bitter rival's professional network profile a year after the man died just to leave a terrible review. He fought a skeleton and somehow lost his own sanity. Petty beyond death. Stop. Let's take a deep breath. Seriously, my brain is melting from the sheer volume of historical stupidity we just uncovered. We watched powerful men die from bad door frames, awful diets, and a blatant refusal to understand basic gravity. You think getting crushed by a faulty roof or drinking yourself to a watery grave on a fancy boat is the peak of human idiocy? It isn't. We need to pause the list and officially crown the gold medal of sheer bad luck. Nothing we discussed can mathematically top a warrior who won a brutal fight but was killed days later by the dead guy he just defeated. I'm stopping the clock to declare an undisputed champion of chaotic karma. Let me introduce you to the ultimate medieval failure, a man who secured a violent victory only to be taken out by a dead man's awful dental hygiene. Prepare yourself for the absolute worst. 33. Viking Earl Sigurd won a battle, strapped the enemy's severed head to his saddle, and rode home. The dead man's buck tooth scratched his leg, causing a lethal infection that killed him days later. History isn't a timeline of noble heroes. It's a chaotic blooper reel of fragile egos, bad diets, and a catastrophic lack of common sense. Power doesn't grant you immunity to door frames, gravity, or dead men's teeth. Which historical idiot deserves the ultimate crown of stupidity? Comment below. I will pin the most ruthless, highly voted comment in the next video.